Hello again, everyone. This is the final sound check. Sound check. Please adjust your loudspeakers or headphones to listen to this session comfortably. And since we are 2 minutes from 4 p.m. London time, 10 a.m. Guadalajara time, it is my great pleasure to start with today's session. As you are all aware, this is a series of webinars on internationalization. We have two different series. One is about to come to an end. This is the 9th webinar of 10, and they are specifically on internationalization of higher education. The second series will start next year in 2019, and it's a series of 5 webinars on best practices from Latin America on internationalization. As you very much be aware of, we are RIESALY, and RIESALY is an Erasmus Plus project with funding from the European Union. The program and mechanisms of today, I was about to say this morning, but for many of you it's already afternoon or evening, for today are similar to the past webinars. Presenter will have about 45 minutes without any interruptions. You are not going to be able to have your microphones open. And we kindly ask you that as our presenter proceeds, you type your questions in the chat room, which is at the bottom right of your screen. Then we will collect your questions and we'll present them on the screen for our presenter to address them. We remind you that this session will be recorded just like the rest of our webinars, and they will be available for you later on our YouTube channel. Without further delay, it is my honor to introduce you to our presenter and topic of today. Elspeth Jones will be talking to us today on internationalization at home. I will read briefly about Elspeth to you. She is Emerita Professor on the Internationalization of Higher Education from Leeds Beckett University and Honorary Visiting Fellow at the Center for Higher Education Internationalization of the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Milan. She has undertaken work for universities around the world and for organizations including the European Commission, the European Parliament, British Council, European Association for International Education, and the IEAA Australia. Professor Jones has specialty in personal, professional, and employability outcomes from international mobility and internationalization of the curriculum at home. He has published widely and is series editor of Internationalization in Higher Education and winner of the European Association for International Education Award for Excellence in Research. It is my honor to leave the microphone now and the screen to Elspeth Jones, who will be taking us into this wonderful topic of internationalization at home. Enjoy. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to Ismail for that introduction. Can I just check you can hear me okay? Is everything all right? Yeah. Good, thank you. Excellent. Well, it's good to see so many people taking part and from so many different countries. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions later on. So I've got a presentation here, as Ismail said, talking about internationalization at home. But actually, I need to also talk about internationalization of the curriculum, because these two terms quite often people think they're very, very different, and I just want to give you some introduction to that as well. So Thank you very much for attending today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So what I'm going to try to do is, first of all, as I say, outline what we mean by these two terms, to see if there's really any difference between them, to think about what we mean by internationalisation at home and internationalisation of the curriculum for all of our students, to describe some ways that we can deliver these ideas, and to give examples in different national contexts. So I'm hoping to get through all of that in the time that we have available. Okay, so first of all, what is the difference between internationalisation at home and internationalisation of the curriculum? So if you were in front of me in a classroom now, I would be asking you this question, but since it's not easy for you to reply, I'm going to carry straight on. I'm going to give you, first of all, a definition of internationalisation at home, which was written by myself and Jos Balen in 2015. So here, there are a few important points here. The first word to look at that's very important is purposeful. So we need to always be purposeful about doing this. It won't work without us thinking carefully about how we integrate international and intercultural dimensions into the curriculum. Now, I've also got here a formal and informal curriculum. I'm going to just talk about that in a few minutes, so don't worry about it too much. But it's for all students. So I think the all students bit is very, very important to keep bearing in mind. And it says within domestic learning environments. It doesn't say the home university. So again, this is important because what we try to do, and I'll give you some examples, is to think about the whole local environment of the university or wherever the institution is based, to see how we can use that environment to provide international and intercultural situations for our students to learn from. Okay, now I hope this isn't too confusing, but I'm going to now show you Betty Lesk's definition of internationalisation of the curriculum. So again, Betty talks about international, intercultural and or global dimensions. And Betty sometimes, she's told me that she feels that international is between two nations, whereas global is across a range of nations. So that's why she's got all three of those in her definition. But she's talking about the content of the curriculum, the learning outcomes, the assessment tasks, the teaching methods, and the support services of a programme of study. So in some respects, it looks very, very similar, and that's absolutely right. It should look very, very similar. The difference is really that internationalisation of the curriculum has been used in Australia and has been used in the UK a lot, whereas internationalisation at home began as something developed in the European Union as part of the idea that it was a contrast to student mobility. So internationalisation at home was a contrast to internationalisation abroad. I think it's a bit complicated, and we probably won't go into too much detail of that today because there are different situations which make it much more difficult to characterise. But just for the moment, let's think about internationalisation at home and internationalisation of the curriculum. So it partly depends on the nature of what we understand by curriculum. So too often we think about internationalisation being associated with mobility, student mobility, with teaching in English, with having international students in the classroom, and with having teachers from other countries deliver the programme. And people sometimes think that's enough. Well, no, it isn't enough. These things are tools to help us deliver internationalisation at home or internationalisation of the curriculum, but they do not give the answer on their own. Okay, so the thing about curriculum, and I mentioned formal and informal curriculum. Formal curriculum is what we think of as being in the classroom perhaps, but being delivered by a member of academic staff, by having assessment associated with it. So that's the key difference. Formal curriculum is assessed, and informal curriculum is not assessed. It's all of the other types of activities that the university provides. I will give you examples of this later on, please don't worry. But the thing is that I think a lot of people simply imagine that curriculum is what happens in the classroom and what the students work from, sometimes called a syllabus or sometimes called a work plan or whatever. So it depends how you interpret the term curriculum, and this is why I think these two terms have become quite confusingly mixed up or separated as though they're something really, really different, whereas in fact they're not. So it's not just about these ideas here. It's about it's thinking about the totality of the student body and how we can help them have those international and global perspectives. So as well as these misconceptions here, there are some others which I just like to mention here. The idea that there is one way of internationalizing the curriculum, one way of internationalization at home. That's not the case. Every university in the world will have a different way of doing it, will have a different context, so it must look different in their context. And the idea of having special international courses or modules or units which a certain number of people take is also not going to help. We need to be thinking about everybody in the curriculum, every single student at the university. Equally, it's not good enough to simply have international case studies and reading lists, because that is again a tool to help us. I'm going to give you further examples of this later on so that you know what it is, by the way, because at the moment I'm telling you what it isn't. So the final thing there, that internationalization is only to do with other countries. And again, I've tried to emphasize the point of intercultural, that we need to think about that as well as international. And intercultural is the way we reach really our objectives in terms of internationalization at home. Again, examples coming soon. Okay. So the next thing, I'm moving on to the next point so that we can get through quickly and we can look at your questions as we go forward. Thinking about why internationalization at home or internationalization of the curriculum is important for our students. And I've put there again for all our students. Why does somebody who will never leave your country or never really work beyond their own hometown or whatever, why do they need to have this introduction to internationalization? Why do we need to think about those kinds of students? Well, I do think it's important to remember that the world is becoming increasingly interconnected. And it's not just about the professional lives, it's also about them as citizens. It's about who they will be living with, how the changing nature of our cities, the diversity of the local populations, they're changing so much. So even if somebody isn't going to work in a multinational corporation, well, firstly, almost all industry and business these days has an international element within it, and the World Wide Web, social media, all of these things are increasingly making the world more globalized. So it's very unusual to have a specifically domestic related context for in the professional world. So in a way we owe it to our students to help them, but equally because they will be facing an internationalized world as citizens of their country as well. But equally, in terms of the issues facing the world, the major problems that we face in terms of climate change, global warming, poverty, hunger, all of these big issues are requiring us more and more to cross international, intercultural boundaries, to cross disciplinary fields, and the communication skills and critical thinking which are developed through this process of internationalization of the curriculum are going to be helpful to people in this respect. Again, examples coming soon. So these are two quotes of mine from the book that you can see there, just for information. That's an introduction to internationalisation, the curriculum, in that book there. Now, I mentioned the interconnectedness of the world and the solving global problems. You may be familiar with the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which took over from the Millennium Development Goals. And if you look at these themes here, the 17 different themes of it, higher education has got a massive role to play in delivering responses to all of the issues here. And we do need to take multidisciplinary approaches. We need to be thinking outside our own nation, our own race, religion, culture, whatever we have. We need to be helping, working together to develop solutions to some of these problems. And it will be more relevant to some disciplines than others, but equally, we, as I said, we need to be preparing our students for working in this kind of world. We've also got other problems. You may be, I'm sure you've been following with interest Donald Trump in the US. We also have a small local problem in the UK, which people call Brexit, which hasn't yet happened. I'm still hoping it won't, but maybe it will have done by the time you come to look at this video again, but I'm still hoping it won't happen. But this rise of nationalism and populism has become very, very prevalent, certainly across Europe. It's very, very strong. So in countries like the Czech Republic, in Poland, in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany, there are right-wing people who are coming from the angle of the very nationalistic, populist views about the world. And if we're going to address some of these issues, we need to be very, very careful about how we take this forward, introducing our students to ideas about intercultural perspectives, about thinking globally rather than just thinking locally. All of these issues are going to help us. I heard a figure the other day that said 20% of Europeans have voted for a very right-wing party in the last few years. So this is an issue which is rising up. And those of you who are from Brazil, I believe your recently elected president is also of this type of thinking. So it's happening all over the world, and we've got to be very careful about it. So I'm not suggesting that internationalisation at home is going to solve these problems, but it is very, very important for us to think how we can introduce our students to these concepts. Okay, now I don't want you to think that mobility is not important. It is definitely important. And we know in particular that international experience offers students very, very significant benefits. So as well as an intercultural experience and international experience, it also helps in terms of their employability through the development of whatever you call them, transferable employability, transversal skills, soft skills, they're sometimes called. And we know that studying, working, or volunteering in another country will help to develop these skills. So again, we owe it to our students to really help those who can't travel to develop these. Here are some examples through my own research that I've found that are developed through that kind of experience. So on the right there, you see the intercultural competence skills, which I've named them intercultural competence skills, by the way. But the list on the left, the employability skills, are very common in lists of what employers are looking for. So these are the skills which are developed, and indeed, the Erasmus Impact Study in 2014, a study on how the Erasmus funding across Europe had been beneficial to students, they found that 92% of employers are looking for these transversal skills. And I'm sure it isn't confined to Europe. I'm sure it's very similar. I know it's similar in Japan, for example, other parts of Asia, similar in Australia, New Zealand, in the US, and I'm sure Latin America has got a very similar pattern. So we know that employers are looking for these skills, and we know that mobility helps to develop them. But the question is, what proportion of your students are having those kinds of international experiences? If it's more than 20%, many congratulations, because that's a very unusual figure. It's in the UK, it's between 0 and 10%. I believe it's 6% at the moment of students who have a mobility experience. And the UK is aiming to double that to make it 13%. So we will still only be in that middle space there. But it's really a very small percentage of students, isn't it? And this means that for the non-mobile majority, even if with, for example, the EU target of 20% of mobility by 2020, the problem is that we've got 80% of students who will not receive those benefits, who won't get the international and intercultural experience. So we need to think differently. We need to think about the 100%, not about the 80%. And we need to think about internationalisation at home as a transformation of mindset. So it's not about moving bodies, it's about moving your mind effectively. It's about changing students' minds and helping them to see the world differently. So international and intercultural can work together because I believe they're two sides of the same coin. We also hear a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion with domestic populations. So, for example, you may have students who are first in the family to attend university. You may have mature students. You may have students from a very distant rural region coming to study in the city. All of these kinds of students are will face similar issues to the international students we get. But we also need to think about their needs and think about how we can help them through internationalisation at home to develop those kinds of perspectives that I was talking about. Reaching the 100% then requires us to think about transformative internationalisation. And I think that this can come through not only international engagement through mobility, but actually through encounters with cultural otherness of any kind. And in a way, really, we need to think about interculturalization rather than internationalization. But it's a very difficult word and it hasn't really caught on. But basically, if you think in terms of interculturalization, it will be very helpful for you. Okay, so moving on to I'm putting these two together because I'm going to give you some descriptions of how we can deliver some of this and also give some examples from different national contexts from my experience from people that I've spoken to about how they're delivering on these things. First of all, I want to show you this 10-point set of ideas, really. There's sort of 10 key ways in which what we mean by internationalization at home. Now I'm going to go into every one of these in detail, so please don't worry about not reading them. But I just want to, I've put there in black 3 specific points there where we've mentioned intercultural or cultural, and just to show you that it isn't simply about internationalization at home. So until September this year, I was chair of the Internationalisation at Home expert community of the European Association for International Education, and we developed these 10 points, and I'm going to use these to give you some examples now, based on a blog that I wrote with Tanja Reifenrath, who is the current, now she's taken over from me in September. She is now the chair of the Internationalisation at Home expert community of the EAIE. You can find the blog there if you want to have a look. It's not particularly So, first of all, this is the first of those 10 points that I showed you on the card. So it offers the idea of global perspectives within the programme of study to all students, whether or not they spend time abroad. And it's important not to think of it as being a second best option. It should be available to all students, and it should be part of the curriculum, even for those students who do get to spend time in another country, because it's about embracing the international and the intercultural across the whole of their discipline area. Secondly, their second bullet point, we need to think about the programme of study, integrating global perspectives into the programme of study, enriching the quality of the programme. But it's also the possibility of actively engaging those diverse cohorts of students that we talked about, whether it's in the classroom or in other parts of the university through the informal curriculum. Okay, what does this mean in practice then? In terms of an inclusive curriculum and bringing those global perspectives in, we can think in terms of the influence of individual cultural background on values and actions, or understanding of professional, cultural, and national contexts, thinking about cultural dominance, and people often talk about decolonization of the curriculum these days, or de-Westernization of the curriculum. And so who decides what will be the focus of the discipline? What will the course look like? It's very different from how it may be seen in one country from another country. So it's very important that we consider that. Sustainability and global impact we've talked about. The ethical and environmental issues, the impact of these on the discipline, or of the discipline on those things, and also cultural considerations in professional practice. So when people are actually working, what do the intercultural issues mean for them? So these are some of the things which illustrate that particular point. The second point of the 10 is that it moves beyond electives or specialised programmes. I said that these are ways that they're tools to help internationalise the curriculum. But what we find is, and there's a lot of research to support this, it's often students who are already interested in study abroad, for example, but equally in choosing an international elective. They're the ones who will tend to choose those options. So unless it's integrated into the compulsory curriculum for every student, there's a danger that people will not be exposed to the ideas of internationalisation at home. Okay, so what does this mean then? In Göttingen, which is where I mentioned Tanja Reifenrath, her university is Göttingen in Germany, and they're using Lewin's three-stage model of unfreeze, change, and refreeze to help people think differently about their programs. They are getting them to really discuss how the curriculum could be dismantled, as it were, and then put back together through a process of rethinking what internationalisation means for them. They're thinking about what will help them, what will enable them, or what will block them at each stage of the process. And they've started with various pilot disciplines, which they're then going to extend across the university. And they're using people who are particularly engaged and interested as change agents to support this process. And so far, it seems to have been, it's working very, very well. And you can read about it if you're interested in that book that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. Okay, the third point, developing international and intercultural perspectives through internationalised learning outcomes in the formal curriculum. So learning outcomes are quite often misunderstood. People have different views of what these are. So I've given some examples there. These need to be integrated into the learning outcomes, and very, very importantly, within the discipline. So it's about the subject area and the subject area needs to change the way it's thinking about internationalisation. Here are a couple of examples that may not be from your particular field, but hopefully you can understand what is meant. In the first case, example 1, implications for diverse cultural and location-specific contexts. In example 2, specifically talking about the local as well as the global impact of, in this case, risk management strategies. So this is what we mean by internationalizing learning outcomes. In my university, where when I was working there, we took a strategic approach to this, and we had a university-wide curriculum review to introduce 3 new graduate attributes, and one of those was global outlook. A group of us got together to help guide staff through its implementation, and we had a cross-university group actually working across different disciplines. And I've written about this with my colleague David Killick. If anybody's interested, I can direct you to several articles that we've written on this. Okay, number 4. Internationalisation at home is supported by informal or co-curriculum activities across the institution. Some people call it extracurricular, some call it co-curricular, and so on. So it's not simply about what happens in the classroom, but having other more informal activities can really strengthen the university's approach to internationalisation at home and help deliver that idea of comprehensive internationalisation. You might think about intercultural communication workshops or buddy programs between international and domestic students, for example, thinking about language tandems, where people of 2 different languages help each other to learn the other language, service learning or volunteering activities in the local community. So this could be within culturally different environments, and I'll give you some examples of those in a second, or indeed cultural programs in the university, for example, film programs or festivals, or talking about different parts of the world and bringing those parts of the world into the university. So these are some of the ways in which they can be introduced. And in the Hague University of Applied Sciences, this has been built into their overall curriculum in what they call interculturality. And the program is called European Studies. So they've got their formal curriculum and the pedagogy, so how the curriculum is delivered, the teaching and learning processes. They also incorporate the student experience overall and creating an international intercultural student experience. But they also incorporate the informal curriculum, the non-assessed part of what students are doing. And indeed, all of these fit within the organisational and strategic frameworks of the university as a whole. And therefore, it's embedded within the curriculum very, very deeply. So again, if you want to know more about this, I'll be happy to give you some reading, but I do know that not all of you will be as interested in the academic side of these issues. You may be more interested in the administrative side, so we'll come to those in a moment. Just continuing with the idea of the buddy system, Betty Lesk wrote about this in a chapter in one of my books, but she paired international and domestic student mentors, giving them some money to support a group of about 20 incoming international business students. They took them for pizza, or they visited the beach, or whatever they did together. And it was a mixed group of domestic and international students having fun, but also thinking about their working within their own disciplines. And she found at the end of the 4-year period that this group had a significantly enhanced engagement with their university life and gave higher scores on the satisfaction. The university itself ran a satisfaction survey, and students from these groups achieved higher scores over control groups in other faculties. So it worked very, very well. Some examples now from the Romanian American University in Bucharest, in Romania. Here, the International Office has been working with academics to help them internationalise the formal curriculum, because quite often the International Office staff have had a lot of international experience themselves, but they also know what students are looking for when they choose to study in their university. So they're passing back advice to the academics as to how their curriculum can be internationalised. They've also introduced double degrees. Again, you may be familiar with this concept, where degrees are awarded by more than one institution. They have culture days, and I think this one on Japan has been going for about 8 or 9 years now. They focus on the kinds of things young people would be interested in, like J-pop or manga, Japanese art, and so on. And it not only does it support the informal curriculum, but they also invite the local community in to engage with this program, and it shares with the local community in Bucharest some ways in which the university itself is becoming more international. They're working with partners and alumni, and indeed Romanians around the world, the Romanian diaspora, where they're living in other countries, to help internationalize the university. So whenever they come back, they may be invited to come and speak in the university. So the program of visiting scholars or visiting speakers is integrated into the courses. They also use collaborative online international learning. I'll come back to that in a second. And they have international summer schools where lots of people are invited to come to Bucharest for a short period of time to study on different subject areas. Now, I don't have a slide on this, but I don't know if anybody is in the group from UDEM, the Universidad de Monterrey, but I know that there they have a very interesting international semester idea. They choose a country and they try to align all kinds of different activities around whichever country is being considered at that time. So I know that recently they had one on France, and the academics were encouraged to incorporate ideas from France into their teaching, whatever their subject was, but they also had fairs and exhibitions, all kinds of things happening which celebrated France. And I know they've done a whole series of countries in this same sort of theme. So if anybody knows Brenda Garcia in UDEM, I'm sure she'd be happy to tell you more about that. But that seems to have worked particularly well. Number 5 of our points, I'll need to move on now. Making purposeful use of the cultural diversity in the classroom for inclusive learning, teaching and assessment practice. Now, of course, this depends where your university is, and some universities will be in cities or countries which have a more diverse student population in terms of nation and culture. So I'm going to talk later on about how we engage other types of cultural difference. But the point here, the first point there, that internationalization at home is strongly learner oriented. So using any kind of cultural diversity in the classroom is very, very important. Integrating the experiences and knowledge not only of internationally mobile students, but also of local students from very diverse backgrounds. Now, internationally mobile students may be international students from other countries who are studying with you, but also it could be those who've been to other countries and come back again. So how do we bring their experience into the classroom and use it to good effect? Well, this is the key this is the reason why it's quite helpful to have that, because basically what we're trying to do is to think about how those alternative perspectives challenge current ways of thinking, challenge students' mindsets. So just because you are right doesn't mean I'm wrong. You haven't seen it from my side. So is it a 6 or is it a 9? And really, this is the fundamental side to what we're trying to achieve, getting students to think differently, to change the mindsets, as I said, the transformative approach to student learning. Okay, more examples coming on this soon. Point number 6 is about creating opportunities for student engagement with cultural others in the local society. So internationalisation at home asks students to think in particular about intercultural as well as international issues, to think about the effects of globalisation, migration and cultural diversity on their doorstep, but also thinks about how, for example, they may be involved in community research projects, but how can that work in terms of linking it with service learning, volunteering, class excursions or visits to the class by members of different communities. And so just thinking more broadly about how we can incorporate the cultural differences in the local community to help to internationalise the curriculum for all our students. Now I'm going to give you some examples now from again from my university when I worked there. So something that's maybe fairly obvious is working with refugees and asylum seekers. And across Europe, we have many refugees and asylum seekers in our different countries. It may be less wherever you are, but where you have people from different national backgrounds, how do we think about incorporating them into the curriculum? In this case, in my university, the one on the right, we invited refugees in to come and talk about their experiences. They were open lectures and workshops by these asylum seekers and refugees. So they came and talked about some of the issues and asked for if anybody, sometimes people could actually help give ideas and so on. The photograph on the left was we had people who were specialists in English language teaching. They would go and help develop their English language skills, but they would also help develop their reading skills, help them to get doctor's appointments, how to work with, for example, translating their expertise and their qualifications so that they could be used in a UK context. So there were many different ways in which our students were able to volunteer and help in these particular cases. Another fairly obvious one in your local community might be different faith communities, or just generally migrants who have moved to your country. And again, these are some photographs from events that we had at the university or in the different communities around. So Poland or India or Africa, these different cultural communities were present in the city where my university is, Leeds. And so we encourage people to engage. We had a big festival, what we call Leeds Met Africa. We incorporated a lot of events around Africa. We worked with the local Sikh community on the top left there, who invited students in to come and share their food. And we had various what we call a culture club, where students would present their particular national culture, either through dance or through tourism or whatever. So we got students involved in helping to present as well. Now it gets a little bit more tricky, because I'm going to think about something which is not to do with international, but it's about intercultural with people that you may be less experienced with. So for example, here, this is a group of young people with severe disabilities, physical disabilities, and we partnered with a home for students, for young people with disabilities. And we had many different kinds of students who went along as part of their program to work with these young people. Now, you may not think of disability as being a cultural difference, but basically, cultural difference is about thinking as I said, seeing that 6 as a 9, seeing the world from somebody else's point of view, trying to understand what life is like in somebody else's shoes. So if you are not yourself severely physically disabled, or have somebody in your family or one of your friends who is, this may be quite a challenge for you. It may be quite challenging for you to think about life for people who are facing these difficulties. So we had some students from physiotherapy who went along to help them with physical movement and used their expertise there. We had others from education who would go along and help with different learning skills, and so on. So there are many different kinds of students who use these opportunities. All right, just a couple of other examples, because this is can be something that people think is rather unusual to think about culture in this way. But here are some other things that we did. Drug addiction and alcohol abuse. We had students volunteering in centres or hostels for people with drug addiction or alcohol abuse. Again, if you don't have that experience yourself, it gives an opportunity to see what life is like for other people, to change your mindset and to transform the way that you think about some of these issues. Going back to what I said, it's about changing mindsets. It's not about moving people around the world. And then finally, women's refuge and homes for looked after children. So first of all, women's refuges are for women and their children often who have had to leave, for example, an abusive partner, and they're given a home and a safe place to live away from the partner who may have been very violent. And again, if you haven't had that experience, if you don't know anybody who has, this can change the way you think about the world. Equally, looked after children, this is it's a term that's used in the UK, where children may need to be taken away from their parents. Perhaps they're drug addicts, for example, or perhaps their parents have died and the state takes care of them in a children. They used to be called children's home, but they're now called looked after children or children in care. So again, students of ours went to these different places and found that they had a very different mindset after working with people in these different places. So I just wanted to give you those examples to try and show that you don't need international students in the classroom. You don't always need to think about international. You need to think about the intercultural. Okay, I'm coming to the last few points on this now, so we need to move on. So it's involving all staff, not only academics and international officers, although they're teaching the curriculum at the heart of internationalisation at home. And the academic staff are very, very important. They need to take ownership of the process, but they need help from colleagues across the university. So it's not just international officers, but educational developers, for example, staff development, quality assurance, faculty administrators, at the library. All the different parts of the university need to be involved in thinking internationally. And here are just a few examples, for example, from the informal curriculum that we had at Leeds Beckett University. We ran these mentoring programs. The man who ran the main restaurant on campus decided he was going to have food from all of the different countries where we had international students from, celebrating international days on campus. We had seminars and exhibitions, we had different festivals. The Students' Union organised various activities, and there were clubs and societies, and we had a big display of flags all around the campus. So really what we were trying to do was to create a campus culture which celebrated and valued that cultural diversity. Whether or not we had students from those countries, it didn't matter. You can do this without international students. And the leadership, the university leadership and the various services reinforces that sense of internationalisation. Okay, so number 8 may or may not include teaching English or another lingua franca. Okay, you can't simply translate a curriculum and it becomes international. It's still got the same perspectives, the same viewpoints, the same starting point. So thinking of the new viewpoints, changing mindsets, it's not language dependent, and therefore an internationalised curriculum may be delivered through English medium programmes, but equally it could be delivered in Spanish or Portuguese or whatever local language you want to deliver in. Internationalisation of the curriculum or internationalisation at home is not language dependent. So, although we need a common language for internationalisation, I apologise that my Spanish is really not very good, so I can't really deliver this lecture in Spanish. I can do it in other languages, by the way, but not Spanish. So we do need that lingua franca, and for the moment, certainly for the majority of the world, that's English. In your context, obviously Spanish and Portuguese function very well for you to work across countries in Latin America, but not necessarily outside that. So that's very helpful, but it doesn't mean we need that delivering the same content in a different language will actually deliver internationalization. I do think it's important, though, that we do study other languages because it helps us with the internationalization process. It requires us to engage with alternative worldviews as a matter of course. That's from something else that I wrote. It requires us to think differently about the world because the language is itself very, very different. So it can help, but it's not necessary in terms of internationalizing the curriculum. Number 9, then, it can include virtual mobility through online working with partner universities. I mentioned this earlier. Whether it's virtual collaborations, shared teaching materials, or virtual guest lectures, which is it's becoming increasingly common. Thinking about it can help us to see the world from perspectives of people in other countries where it would be difficult for our students to get there, but equally thinking about different ways of conducting scientific research or different ways of thinking about subjects. Students get access to knowledge that they wouldn't be able to find on their home campus, but where it's a collaborative format, where they're working with students in another country, it can also enhance communicative and social skills. If you're interested in this area, lots is being written about what's called COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning. And indeed, there is a centre at the State University of New York which focuses on this and has an annual conference. So if you're interested, please look for this on the website and find out more about it. The conference proceedings, as you can see there, the 2018 conference is already online. So please have a look at that if you're interested. Okay, finally, point 10 in this list. We've deliberately put this at the end because we're trying to say that international students are not necessary for internationalization at home. But it can help to have purposeful engagement between international and domestic students in both formal and informal learning settings. It's not just about the classroom, but it's about other things that you do, as I've tried to illustrate today. And just to reinforce it again, being successful in internationalization at home does not require international students. This is an interesting, the Council of Europe Competencies for Democratic Culture. I do like this, and there's a link there to show you where you can find this. The idea of this kind of competence as a global citizen or as a living in a democratic culture, being good citizens generally, thinking about values and attitudes, the skills we might need, and the knowledge and critical understanding that we may need to have as well. So I do quite like this. So I'm moving here really into resources that you may want to have a look at, and that's one of them. Another 2 books that I would really recommend. This is in my series Internationalisation in Higher Education. But if you're interested on the academic side, Internationalising the Curriculum by Betty Lesk, and then on the teaching and learning side, Tools for Teaching in an Educationally Mobile World by Jude Carroll. They're both really excellent, and if you're interested in that, I can recommend both of them really heartily. Betty Lesk has also got a website, Internationalisation of the Curriculum in Action, and it's a very easy website, a URL to remember, so that's it there. You'll find lots of different things on that website. For administrators, you might want to have a look at this Erasmus Plus project, a different Erasmus Plus project, which you may have heard of. It's called SUCTI, SUCTI, Systemic University Change Towards Internationalisation. But it's really focusing a lot on administrative staff. So if you're interested in that, please do take a look at that. Okay, so I've talked for a very long time. I'm sorry if I've talked too quickly, but I do hope you've understood what I've been talking about. And this is what I've tried to do. I've tried to outline what we mean by IAH and IOC, and we've talked about them really not being a significant difference between them. Thinking about why it's important for all of our students to have these kinds of the introduction to the international and the intercultural. I hope I've described some of the ways it can be delivered, and I hope I've also given some examples of internationalisation at home in different national contexts. So I'd just like to thank you. There's an example there, my email address, my Twitter handle, and where you can find my own academic work. The things that I've mentioned today should be on there. But otherwise then, I look forward to your questions.
We thank Elspeth for her wonderful presentation and quite interesting topic. Now, please do proceed to type your questions in the chat room. Dr. Magdalena Bustos is behind the scenes and with us. You cannot see her at the moment, but she's collecting your questions and putting them together in a PowerPoint presentation so that we may also present on the screen here, since all of this is being recorded to be available to all of you in our YouTube channel. We'll give 1 or 2 more minutes for the gathering of the questions from the chat room, and we will present them shortly to you. Bear with us just 1 or 2 more minutes, and we'll be back to you with the questions on the screen. Thank you. I also take this opportunity to invite you to visit our website, erasmusplusriesal.org is our website. You'll see it later on again posted, where you can visit all the actions and activities that RIESAL Consortium is performing on behalf of the capacity building, for the capacity building of international higher education in Latin America. There are 4 European partners in this consortium. Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore is just one of them in Italy. And Elspeth Jones is among the scientific researchers dealing with internationalization of higher education there. We also have a German partner, which is the Fachhochschule Münster, the University of Applied Sciences in Münster. There is a Spanish partner, Universidad de Alicante, and our Belgian partner is La Vrije Universiteit Brussels, which is the Flemish Free University of Brussels. These 4 European partners have come together to provide us with their expertise on different aspects for internationalization of higher education. At the moment, there is 13 institutions and associations in Latin America members of RIESAL. Once the funding stops from the European Commission, we would like to continue with these efforts as we create RIESAL into an organization based out of the Observatory for International Higher Education and Network in Research from UNESCO, the OVIDET. OVIDET, you can also find it, is the acronym. You can find it in the internet, its website, and that's where RIESAL is going to be embedded once the project ends as an Erasmus Plus financed by the European Union. We will shortly now have the questions on the screen, and we'll be reading them aloud to have Elspeth address them to you. Thank you. So here we are. Carolina Seaman from Ecuador is asking, will mobility to or from the UK be negatively affected by Brexit? And then Delaberg from Iteso in Guadalajara, Mexico, wants to thank you, but she believes that for us, and she means Iteso, probably can identify some areas of our universities which are very open to this kind of programming. However, there are also departments areas of our universities which are either not interested, thinking it does not pertain, or have attitudes of we tried this once and foreign students didn't enroll in those classes. How can we address the more reticent areas of our universities for a 100% student involvement?
Well, you can't do this all at once. I think it's very important to think about a progressive change. I mentioned the University of Göttingen and their idea of using Lewin's three-stage model to unfreeze, to reform and refreeze, and to get people to think differently about their curriculum. It's very interesting what you say. They think it doesn't pertain to them. I wonder what kind of disciplines you're thinking about there. Quite often it's sciences and maths who think that it doesn't pertain to them. But firstly, we have lots of examples of how, although scientific thinking is perhaps the outcome of the scientific thinking, the theories and the knowledge about the way the world works, for example, they are universal, but the way people reach those decisions or reach those answers to the theories is very different depending on different countries and cultures. So we know that, for example, people approach problem solving in very, very different ways depending on their cultural background. And until until the academics are introduced to this idea, to think that these are the problem solving approach is different around the world, they don't necessarily realize this. And so it's important to try to get them to think about the intercultural aspects of their field, not simply about the so-called universality of the content. So I'm not sure which programs you're thinking of, but that's one example where they think it doesn't pertain, but it actually does. I've spent a long time looking at this, and I haven't yet come across a single discipline where internationalisation of the curriculum or internationalisation at home is not relevant. So, as I said, if we focus on the students as the outcome of this whole process, we need to get their minds thinking differently, having a transformational experience. And so really applies to every single student. I'm not sure again about the comment, we tried this once and foreign students didn't enroll in those classes. I've tried to say very clearly that it's not about foreign students, it's about domestic students, it's about any student actually in the institution, and there may or may not be international students involved. So a good way forward really is the kind of approach that I mentioned from Göttingen, where you take it step by step. You start with the disciplines which are interested and then move it forward into other disciplines and get people to pass on their ideas and think differently. It takes a long time and it's not easy. I really wouldn't want you to imagine that this is an easy process. It's something that is really an ongoing thing and it never really ends. So all we can do is look at different examples, think about how it will work in our institution, and then move it forward from that perspective. The other question on there is, will mobility to from the UK be negatively affected by Brexit? Well, as I said, I'm hoping Brexit won't happen anyway, but secondly, it really won't matter because we're not talking about mobility here, we're talking about internationalisation at home. So the internationalisation dimension is the thing to focus on. And the serious answer to the question is that actually nobody has any clue what's happening if Brexit goes ahead, because our government is hopeless. So we shall have to see.
There should be, yes.
I don't
There's
know
a
if there are
second
any
slide
other
coming up.
questions there.
Definitely. Should be there shortly. Yep, it's coming up.
It takes a long time, doesn't it? It's very exciting, not
It
knowing
is tricky. There are
what's going to be
times
there,
where
but
it would take just a split second, and there are times when it takes a minute and a half, and it feels forever. Yes, here's coming. Yes.
longer.
All right. So now let's
see what these questions are. Okay. Well, that one by Claudia is a similar one. As I said, it's important not to try and do everything at once and to try and sort of do it step by step and engage the enthusiasts. Start with the enthusiasts and spread out from that enthusiastic group. Give lots of examples about what could be done. Talk about, for example, some of the things that you've heard about other universities doing. Here, why don't we try this? This is a really good idea. Look what I heard about. Look what I read about. So thinking about how you can make a difference to that, involving the international office, but also involving academic staff as far as possible. So this is a good way to move things forward. And as I say, there are lots of examples now coming out. I should mention, if you're interested, if you're on LinkedIn, the Internationalisation at Home group of the EAIE is free to join, and you do have to it's a closed group, so you just have to let one of us know that you're interested. So if you go onto the EAIE website and look for Internationalisation at Home, then you'll find all the details there. What we're trying to do at the moment is to have what we call postcards from the field, asking universities to add their ideas or share approaches that they've used in their institution. So this is a good way to learn from what other people are doing. As I said, there is no one answer, and it really depends on your own institution. You have to find your way, bearing in mind what other people have done and getting ideas from them. Okay, so that was Claudia's. Then we've got Joshua. Okay. How can we work on IOC and IOH in STEM programs? Okay. I've just written a book chapter about this actually. There was a conference in Berlin earlier this year about this. Joshua, if you want to send me an email at the address that you've seen on the presentation, I'll send you some resources, or I'll send you a list of what can be used. Basically, I think going back to my point about the Millennium Development Goals, I believe it's the STEM disciplines which have got the most to contribute. And it's also in STEM disciplines, particularly engineering, where you often find a huge amount of mobility with engineers typically working in many different countries before settling down in one. And so they, of all people, really need to have the kind of intercultural skills as well as the academic skills to help them. And that there are lots of resources which might help as well. So if you drop me a note, and I'll send you some resources which might be helpful. Adrian, more examples of virtual internationalization programs. Well, as I say, if you look at the COIL website there, they have a huge amount of detail on there. There are examples of people who basically just running classrooms with one of their partner institutions. They get the academics get together and work on solving a problem together. There are various examples of this happening around the world, and as I say, start with that the SUNY COIL Centre, and you'll get lots of good examples there. Okay, so I don't know if there are. Oh, here we go. It's more of the design arts. How could studio be internationalized? Okay, well, I'm guessing that in some respects it's already internationalized in terms of the examples of different kinds of art that is considered around the world, and different the history of art, or different movements in different countries and so on. How the studio could be internationalized is a very interesting question, which actually I've never been asked before. Obviously, if you have international students in the classroom, that's really helpful. But I think, again, if you think about the interculturalized rather than internationalized, it's important. So is it possible to bring people together from different cultural backgrounds in the very broad senses that I've spoken about? It's not just about religion, nationality, the kind of culture that we think about typically if we go down that route, but people with matching disabled students with able-bodied students, matching people with different learning styles, with different heritage countries, with coming from different parts of a country, from a rural area to a big city. Just thinking about how the people in the room are different, and you can ask them to describe for themselves how they see themselves as different from other people, and get them to form intercultural groups in that way. And I've found, generally speaking, that artists, when you ask them to do this kind of thing, they're very, very creative. So it would be a really good way of starting them off in that kind of studio type environment. Ask them how you could do this. Okay, I'm sorry it's not a great answer, but it's a really good question. Next then, from Andres, how can you, okay, right, exactly. So not just looking at figures of mobility, that's very, very important. So as I tried to talk earlier about internationalizing learning outcomes, and the way that this really links into the formal curriculum. So if students are achieving those kinds of internationalized learning outcomes, and the evidence is of that is through assessment, then it can be one way of looking at the evaluation of those programs. It's also possible to have student surveys, focus groups, interviews. Do you believe this to be an international university? How could your international experience be made better? Those kinds of things. If you're talking more generally about internationalisation, that there are a few people who've written about this, about different methods of internationalising, of assessing internationalisation or evaluating internationalisation. There's one called MINT, M-I-N-T, for example. There's another which is run by the Dutch Flemish Accreditation Board, the NVAO. And again, you can, excuse me a second. You can look these things up online, but you can also you can also find examples of it in the literature. So you should be able to find those. Okay, Andres, I think I've got somebody with your name who follows me on Twitter, so it may be that you can send me a direct message on Twitter, and I can help further with that if
All right,
you'd like
Elspeth,
to.
we have one last slide. Yeah, one more, and that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
So is that okay? Okay. I'll try to keep going.
Oh, no, 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 I wouldn't dare.
How about you, Ishmael?
No,
Have
no,
you got
no.
any questions?
No, no, I'm still in the quiet learning process. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. But I would like to take this
Quiet learning
opportunity
process.
to
Okay.
mention to those still with us that there is a webinar coming up this very week, and we will show it immediately after the last slide of questions. It's coming up this Thursday, and it's in Portuguese to make things interesting in RIESALY. It's loading, it's loading.
Uh-huh. Okay. Right. So, in general, administrators look at domestic needs. Right. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about how it depends on who creates the curriculum. And very, very importantly, we do need to imagine what the curriculum would look like if it was designed in another country or by somebody else with a different perspective on the world. In the same way as I'm sure if you have seen, say, the same subject, the curriculum for the same subject, for example, in Colombia and in Spain, even though the languages are the same, the starting point for the curriculum will be very different. The view from Spain, the view from Colombia will be very different. And so really we need to try to encourage, I don't know where, I don't know if in your university it is administrators or curriculum designers. In the UK, it's the academics themselves who take on this role. But I don't know what your position is in the university, but we need to encourage those people developing the curriculum to think outside the normal way of working. Now, you say repositories to look at internationalized curricula for each course. There is no repository because, as I said at the beginning, each program in each university in each country around the world is going to have a slightly different approach to this. But there are examples. You can look, for example, at Betty Lesk's website. You can look, going back to the question about the STEM disciplines, there are people in the UK who've tried to produce really guides for people in some of the STEM disciplines. That's referred to in this chapter that I mentioned that I recently completed. And so if there's anything in particular, if you have any particular disciplines in mind, please could you just drop me a note and I will try to send you whatever I can. It's a little bit easier than trying to describe it online here because I can't show you or give you the URL for the resources. But even online, there are many, many things that you can have a look at. So please do contact me if I can help further.
I believe
Okay.
so. And
how are we
oh
doing,
no,
Ishmael? Do you think that's the end of the questions now?
yes, we did have those already.
So my voice is going anyway.
No, that was it. That was it. Yes, our next webinar.
Oh, another one. Okay.
Yeah, it is Celso, and it's going to be in Portuguese. So we have, it's going to be on la planeación estratégica para la internacionalización, and it is this very next Thursday, November 29, at 1 p.m. Brasilia time. Please do the adjustments needed to find out what is your local time. Muchas gracias, muito obrigado. No falo português, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Elspeth, for this wonderful presentation and to provide us with crucial information for us to take this new approach or this new focus on internationalization that it's badly needed everywhere else, but desperately in Latin America, since there seems to be never enough funds for student mobility. So we might as well start learning how to do it at home. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We will proceed now by turning off the camera and the microphone and stop recording. We'll look forward to seeing you next time in our Portuguese session on Thursday. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.